Hello, Phil Cross here. How you all doing? I've mentioned a couple of times in some of the sort of the previous little posts I've done on it, and whether you watch them and have any interest or not, you know, it's a matter for you. But I've said a couple of times that maybe the coppers ought to be given a little bit of slack, because, you know, sometimes you might say, oh, you know, he's been extremely rude, or he shouldn't have spoken to me like that, but you don't necessarily know what they've been dealing with a half hour before, and how things can affect them, because, you know, we're all human beings at the end of the day, and just because he's or she's a copper doesn't mean that, you know, they don't get affected by stuff in the same way that anybody else would expect to get affected by it. So just a couple of things, the types of things that we as police officers would deal with, and I've said before on one of the posts, you know, almost on a daily basis we see stuff that a normal person going through their life would not see even once, you know. And when I was on the murder teams over at Barking, so, you know, we'd investigate murder as it came in, an extremely privileged position to be in, to investigate the murder of another human being. It's an extremely privileged thing to do, and for the time I was there, I was actually quite proud of what we did as a team. You know, I was an advanced exhibits officer, so you would deal with things a little bit more than other officers on the team would be. All of the officers on the team would have a different specialism, so you like the family liaison, exhibits, you know, all these kind of different roles. And I was an exhibits officer, and I worked closely with the forensics managers and be involved quite heavily in the crime scene examination and stuff like that. So to to give you an indication, you know, we dealt with, and this is the where it can affect you, because you're investigating the murder, but you're also, in some of these situations, the perpetrator has basically ruined two lots of families' lives, really. You know, the family of the person that they've killed, and their own family, because, you know, their own family now have got a murderer in their family, and they're going to prison, and, you know, all of the stuff that comes here, it works sort of both ways, really. But, you know, I dealt with I was a advanced exhibits officer at a crime scene in Dalston, where a 13-year-old had been stabbed and killed, and the reason he'd been stabbed and killed was because they were arguing over whose turn it was to have a go on a stolen fucking mountain bike. That's how ludicrous it can sound, you know. I actually was the exhibits officer on what is recorded to have been the oldest victim of knife crime. It was a lady, 97 years old, and she was stabbed and killed by her son. And, you know, you think yourself, 97, and she's the victim of knife crime. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. I've had a guy come over from the Caribbean. He's come over to stay, and he felt he got had over, and in an argument about 50 quid over the cost of a night's stay in somebody's fucking front room. He got stabbed and killed for that 50 quid. You know, it's crazy the value that people are prepared to put on life, which is fucking low. You know, and we've got to deal with that, and we've got to deal with you know, when you're dealing with a 13-year-old's family who's dead, and the reason he's dead is because it was deemed that it weren't his turn to have a go on a fucking push bike. How do you convey that to somebody? So, you know, some of the things you deal with as an advanced exhibits officer, you're involved in the post-mortems as well, where you're assisting the forensics manager around retrieval of evidence from the deceased. And, you know, to describe one, when I spoke to you in one of the previous films, when my dad, you know, said to me, "You never talk about work," and it's, well, how the fuck do I talk to you about this? How do I tell you about this? You know, it's just, it's not something you bring up in conversation. It's not something. Why would you want to hear it? You know, it's a crazy thing. So, the Royal London Hospital had a new facility, new mortuary opened, and there was a post-mortem being done by a victim of murder. I was in there with the forensics manager, and we were doing a retrieval of evidence from the poor young man. And this young man had been so brutally, I mean, like kicked and stamped to death. It was crazy, the injuries that this lad had sustained. It was just crazy, abhorrent, really. But whilst we were in there, and we were with the pathologist, and they were doing the post-mortem and what have you, and retrieving the evidence, at the far end there was something like six beds, if you like, where this kind of thing could go on. But there was only us in there, except at the far end. And this is the kind of thing I'm trying to get across to you about what officers deal with, and how they try and compartmentalise it and deal with it. And sometimes when you deal with them, they may have the zig about something. So whilst we're dealing with this victim of murder, who was absolutely brutally fucking killed, I mean, like brutally killed, at the far end of the mortuary was a nurse, and she was cleaning and wrapping the body of a stillborn baby. And when you try and process that, of what you're actually looking at, and then what you can see at the further end, and the kind of processes that we're going through with the post-mortem, yet the way the nurse was so gentle with this baby and taking so much care over wrapping it. When you come away from that, how the fuck do you talk to people about that? And this is something that came out in the PTSD therapy. You know, it's something I've never really spoken about before, but it came out quite quickly with them, and it's that kind of thing. You know, members of the public can be very quick to lambaste a police officer because they've been rude to them, but you've got no idea of what's been going on in that police officer's day or recent weeks, what they've been dealing with it, and how they're trying to process it. And that's something I could never, that's something I seem to come back to that one quite a lot, from the actual brutality to the actual, from brutality at one end of the room to the actual love and care taken to wrap a little baby, and it's a crazy thing. So yeah, cut them a little bit of slack. You know, coppers have a lot to deal with in their life, trying to protect you, the members of the public. But it's not always a pleasant thing to do. It's not always something that's easy to cope with. So yeah, I'll leave you at that. Ta-da.